This is something that happened to me and my older brother years ago when we were younger. I've always been reluctant to talk about it, due mainly to the fact that the people I have decided to tell never believed me, but I'm hoping you guys here may understand it differently. We were born and raised in Scotland, in the Lowlands, near the border between Ayr and Dumfries. Our family had lived there for generations, and as such, we almost had a natural knowledge of the local area and knew all the best and most beautiful spots. This happened back in the 1980s. I was about 11 and my brother would have been around 16. It was the summer holidays, and as such, in Scotland, the weather was shit. However, being Scottish meant that a heavy downpour didn't deter us from going out and enjoying ourselves, especially in a time before mobile phones and tablets. My brother woke me up one morning at about 6 AM, tossing a waterproof coat onto my face and shouting at me in his usual overzealous manner. He said we were going for a hike for the day, and a smile crept across my face. I loved the hikes and the antics me and my brother got up to when on them. We left the house with slices of burnt toast in our mouths and began hiking west out of our village. In no time at all, we were surrounded by the serene isolation of the Scottish wilderness and on a trail that had trees looming over us either side, blotting out the grey sky above and casting a dark canopy of shadows. We had hiked down this muddy dirt trail for what felt like an hour, and the rain was still pouring. My brother decided to take us off trail, which wasn't abnormal. I understand that in some of the large national parks in the US, it isn't a good idea to stray off the established trails, but here in Scotland, it isn't as much of a big deal. Nor is it as dangerous. We clambered into the undergrowth, tearing our way through the thick vines and heavy leaves as kids do, and came out into an opening. I could see by the look in my brother's eyes that he had been here before, and another untidy trail that was to our left confirmed this to me. My brother beckoned me towards him and pointed ahead, pulling me to his field of view. From where I was stood, you could see a bed of water. It could have been a puddle, yet the water was crystal clear. Again, this wasn't abnormal, as the Scottish lowlands are full of lochs, ponds, rivers and streams, and during childhood, we found ourselves stumbling across them regularly. We headed towards it, but the way was blocked off by some pretty thick broken tree trunks and many brambles and thorns. My brother asked me to go through and check out the mysterious body of water to see what it was, as I could fit through the gap beneath the trunks, and it saved him the hassle of hacking us a trail for no reason. I agreed, relishing the opportunity to lead some of my own adventuring, and got straight on my hands and knees, crawling under the rotting bark up to my chest in thick, brown mud. It took me a few minutes and I was nicked by a few thorns here and there, but for the most part, I managed to slither out unscathed. From where I was stood, you could see down to this small pond, about 15 feet long and 11 feet wide, from a small, rocky balcony. There was an almost man-made looking trail that wound down to the shore of the pond, the water of which was as clear as a crystal, to use a cliché simile. My brother shouted through, asking what it looked like. I found myself ignoring him. The scene before my eyes was like nothing I had ever seen, and I found myself enchanted. I walked down the trail. My brother's shouts seemed to fade out. I lost sight of the pond as I passed behind a single layer of evergreen trees that followed the windy trail down. As the pond came back into view, I inhaled sharply at the sight of a huge, black stallion. It was one of those steeds that had a thick mane down the back of its legs, and the whole beast was dripping wet, as if it had climbed out of the pond moments ago, which it must have, because I didn't see it anywhere else. It was featureless except for its glowing red eyes and one pulsing vein running down its nose. It was a terrifying beast that would usually have me running for the hills. However, for some reason, I found myself walking towards it with one hand outstretched. It neighed and reared up, seeming to become excited at my approach. I drew closer to it, its eyes like hot coals, burning me, sucking me into its demonic grasp, and its hair like seaweed. I was close when I felt a heavy hand yank me back and my brother wail, "No!" He covered my eyes and started shoving me back up the trail, screaming at me not to look back. He pretty much threw me back through the bush, scratching my face, and he came through himself seconds later, picking me up and throwing me back onto the trail we had come from. We ran all the way home and told no one. We spoke about it to each other, and my brother admitted that he had seen it too, and that he thought it was a kelpie, a supposed to be mythical creature from Scottish lore, and that if I had touched it, according to legend, I would have stuck to it and been dragged to the depths of the pond. That was the first time I'd ever heard of a kelpie, and I know now the stories are more than just that. I think even stranger than my encounter with a supposedly mythological creature is the pond itself. We went back multiple times and never found it again, despite finding the first clearing. Years later, we Google Earth searched the surrounding area and turned up nothing, making the whole experience even creepier. Back in 2008, me and my girlfriend were absolutely skint and lived in a shitty, mediocre flat situated in a rough part of Edinburgh in Scotland. It was part of a large tower built sometime in the 70s and it was fucking disgusting. It was a tasteless eyesore that ravaged the skyline a mile either way, but it was cheap and we needed it. The flat had a tiny ass bathroom, no bigger than a standard toilet cubicle, a mid-sized bedroom that had mould growing up the walls, a tiny living room that didn't even have enough space for a coffee table between the TV and the couch, and oddly, a very large kitchen that hadn't been updated since before I was born. Now, I just want to say, this tower block had well over 100 flats, and I swear, I must have asked at least 24 residents if they had anything similar happen to them, and from what I've been told, it was only us. Either we were easy targets, or it was our flat specifically. It didn't start straight away. We had lived there about 5 months before anything noticeable started happening, but when it did, it was pretty crazy. It started off with us either sat in the tiny living room watching telly and hearing bangs from the kitchen, or with us just coming home from work. Both times, we would go into the kitchen to see cupboard doors wide open, the same with the fridge door, and the oven was on. Me and my partner played the blame game against each other as it was happening regularly and we both couldn't seem to explain it, but the more we seemed to argue over it and acknowledge it, the worse it seemed to become. Over the coming months, the activity intensified as we both began to realise we weren't the ones doing it. On 2 occasions, both whilst we were sleeping, the fire alarm would sound. We would go into the kitchen to see a pan filled with boiling water on the hob. The hob was often empty when we went to bed. Naturally, the whole tower had to be evacuated on both occasions and we received a fine from our landlord the second time. All this was before things were thrown. The first time, it nearly killed my bloody girlfriend. A paperweight off my bedside table landed heavily on her chin, bruising it. There was no way it could have slid from the far side of the bedside table, lifted, gone over me, and landed on her chin. This activity began to put a strain on our relationship, and we were unsure of everything and couldn't explain so many things. Things finally came to a head one night in November. We were having a pretty intense argument and were both stood in the kitchen flailing our arms about when, bang! The bulb showered over us, bits of fine powdered glass covering our faces. We both left there and then, that night, returning only once to collect all of our stuff. We crashed at my girlfriend's mum's house until we found another place. I did some research at a library and found out this particular ghost or haunting could be attributed to a poltergeist, something I'd never heard of. I had heard of the Steven Spielberg film with the same name, but had never seen it and never knew what the real thing was. Needless to say, me and my girlfriend, who is now my wife, haven't rented a flat since.
Me and my husband were married in 2005, and if I had to describe us, I'd say we were a kooky duo. We were free-spirited goths, as contradictory as that sounds. We held core hippie beliefs, yet loved the world of the paranormal and macabre, which seemed almost taboo to us. Naturally, it came as no surprise to our friends and family when we purchased a home out in Missouri, which was converted from an old wooden church in a quiet neighborhood. The house was perfect and well in budget when we purchased it. One bedroom that was on a mezzanine, looking out over the open plain. Living, dining room, small kitchen tucked further away, and a really small bell tower that had been converted into an attic. Things were odd from night one. Me and my husband, Jay, would both hear noises from the living room below the mezzanine. It would differ from quiet scuttles or whispers to creaks and screeches of furniture being moved. We both strongly believed in the paranormal and supernatural, so we both immediately jumped to it being a haunting. We shouldn't have, really, but, well, we were right. I'm gonna tell you this now, so I don't burst your bubble after you've heard what happened. Long story short, we caught some unexplained footage on film, but I can't show it to you, as the clip no longer belongs to me. I'm not gonna start beef, as it was our own fault for being foolish, but we showed it to a TV network who expressed interest in using the footage. We got $500 for it, but didn't read the contract properly until after we signed it. We basically handed over all ownership and usage of said footage. As I'm aware, they still haven't broadcast it yet. It was supposed to be on a new paranormal case study series that hasn't been released yet. Annoying, but just another lesson learned. The footage in question happened in the wake of us setting up trail cams in the house after about a month of living there. The camera is tucked neatly under the mezzanine, and you can see the whole living and dining room. The timestamp was at 2:33 a.m., and these orbs suddenly floated directly past the camera, 5 of them in total, all ranging in size, but all emanating their own light. They disappeared off screen, and about 30 seconds later, the coffee table in the middle of the room appeared to be pulled slightly. Then it stopped. Then it was pulled harder and hit the couch. And this was a big deal for us, and during our time living there, we respected the spirits, but didn't get too close or communicate with them, in case they were demonic or evil. They stayed out of our way, and we stayed out of theirs. The haunting was mainly auditory, strange taps and clicks, disembodied footsteps, and soft tolling of bells, despite the original bell being removed. That was, until the throwing started. It started with harmless objects like tissue paper or empty cans. We would be minding our own business when one of these items would suddenly slap us on the back of the head. It was a step too far, but we both did our best to ignore it. However, it only worsened. Scissors would regularly be tossed at us, once even cutting my hand as I stuck it out to protect myself. In the kitchen, knives would regularly be thrown, damaging furniture and slicing Jay's arm. Enough was enough. We visited the local church to speak to the priest. He told us how he used to be the priest at that church before it was converted. He told us how if anyone else had said their old church house was haunted, he'd immediately dismiss it as the ground is still hollowed. However, he confessed that a 13-year-old choir boy named Charlie died 3 years ago after falling down the altar and hitting his head. He agreed to come and bless the house, and we independently burnt sage in all the rooms. The priest personally prayed for Charlie, whom he said was known for being mischievous in his life. The priest explained, perhaps in defense of the poor soul, that he was only throwing glass and knives out of frustration. The activity subsided, but never stopped, and we were constantly on edge, bracing ourselves for flying knives and other deadly projectiles. This is what ultimately led to us moving out and buying a house down the road. We still live there to this day, and still go past the old converted church regularly.
As a child, sometimes you don't understand that things shouldn't be there. That you shouldn't be seeing people in your room at night, and that things shouldn't be moved by things you are unable to see. You can really freak your parents out by saying creepy things about things or other people you have seen. Most of the time, they will dismiss it as your imagination, but sometimes they will take a second thought, because weird things may have happened to them. Because the house you were living in really was haunted. For this story, we have to go back to the early 90s and my childhood home in Portland, Oregon. We lived in a large Victorian-style home. It had 3 floors as well as an attic and a basement. It had a balcony on the top floor where the attic was, and the exterior was ornately decorated and painted a haunting dark purple. I had visitations for years that I thought were normal. The one that came the most was who I referred to as the White Man. He was an older gentleman, probably over 70, who wore a pristine white suit, sported slick back hair that had turned white with age, a colour my dad often referred to as mature blonde, and the facial hair that matched, a bushy moustache and a thin sharp beard. The only thing he sported that wasn't white was his walking cane, a black polished stick that had a large jewel encrusted on the top. He would visit frequently, at some points in my life, almost daily. His actions would vary from shouting which no one else seemed to hear, might I add, for someone to leave his house, or get someone to stop crying, all the way to this old man pulling out a revolver and punching the air in front of him. On another side note, these visitors, they didn't look like the usual images of ghosts. They looked just like normal people, just like you or I. I feel like the White Man was an intelligent haunting, at least to some extent, and he was the only ghost I saw in the day. He would lounge in the kitchen, smoking a clay tobacco pipe, or would be stood by the oven and just stare at me. At night, my covers would sometimes be pulled, rather vigorously, off my sleeping body, and my bedroom door would slam repeatedly. I also attribute little things like keys being misplaced and such as being the work of the white man. He was the only spirit cheeky enough to instigate such pranks. The white man wasn't the only spirit I saw though. There was a small girl in a checkered dress who, eerily, carried a blue balloon with her at all times, though I never got a creepy vibe from her, more inquisitive. I used to think she looked like a little girl from the 50s or 60s, and when researching this house about 2 years ago, I found out a girl, about the age of the one that visited me, had died on a ride at a fun fair in 1957. Her hair had been caught in some machinery of some sort and had yanked back her head, breaking her neck from the pull and scalping her from the raw force. She lived at that old house, though the young girl I saw never had any signs of trauma. There was also a dog that I never caught doing it, but still to this day believe is responsible for leftover food going missing out of the bin, something we put down to raccoons slipping in through the cat flap. The cats never noticed the dog, if it was there. And then, finally, there was Black. Before you call me out on my lack of creativity in naming these spirits, bear in mind I gave these visitors their names when I was about 7, so if I see a man wearing a white suit, he gets called the white man. If I see a dog, I don't know, it's just a dog. And if I see a black, shapeless shadow, I just call it Black. I think Black used to know the white man, perhaps a brother or an associate of some kind. The white man could be pretty scary at times, but would always back off if Black was around. I used to think, at first, that Black was a good guy, here to help me. I couldn't have been more wrong, and some people I have told about Black suggest it could have been demonic. Being a silly little child, I opened up to Black, and that's when shit really hit the fan. It started with the pressure at the end of my bed. I was on the top bunk of my bunk bed and there was no one there. My covers, though, would be super tight. Then, I'd begin waking up with red marks on my wrists and ankles that vaguely looked like handprints, but may not have been. On more than one occasion, I'd wake with deep, red scratches on my stomach, legs or back, and big bruises I had no idea how I'd got them. Black would linger in my room, almost as if he was just watching me. He was tall, and some nights we'd be face to face, and other nights he'd be way back off near my doorway. Now, Black was, as I stated earlier, just a shadow, and I never saw any distinguishing features, but I always just got the feeling that he was looking at me. My parents brushed off my stories and dismissed my bruises as being from play, though I later found out they were absolutely terrified and the bruises were the deciding factor in us finally moving. However, all the activity seemed to cease about a month before we left, and in my honest, more mature opinion, I feel like the visitors, whether nice or nasty, gave up after they knew we were moving, as if they gave up on us because we wouldn't die there, so there was no need to try and make friends or assert authority. I know how crazy this all sounds. Believe me, I do. And I know it sounds ridiculously far-fetched, like a B-movie horror script, but if I'm honest, it did affect me growing up, and if you don't believe me, I honestly don't care. I had to live it, and there's always going to be skeptics, especially when I have no physical, definitive evidence. Hey guys, Brothers Jackson here. I really hope you enjoyed this collaboration with the amazing Killer Orange Cat. He's helped me out a load on this. I've been waiting to get this out for ages, and he has been willing to help every step of the way. Make sure you go and check him out. There will be a link to his channel in the description below. Give this video a like to show him and me some support, and go over to his channel and check out the other video which I narrate a story in. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more, guys. We can still hit this 1,000 subs milestone. Even if it's after the 20th of February, I'm going to keep going for it. So, share these videos. Peace out, guys. Thank you. Hey guys, Brothers Jackson here. I just want to start this video by telling you all that I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice doesn't sound the same as usual. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Now, I was hiking alone up in Arkansas some years back on a trail in Withrow Springs State Park. I can't remember the trail name for sure, but after looking online, I'm confident it was probably the Forest Trail though. I live on the other side of the US and haven't been back since to check. I went after my brother, whom I was in Arkansas to visit, recommended the park to me as he knew I enjoyed hiking. This trail was primarily long and narrow, and only the elevation changed throughout. It was surrounded either side by a wall of trees that gave the trail an air of tightness. All was good this day. It was cloudy and a bit windy, not too warm, yet the weather wasn't too poor that I wanted to leave. I'd been hiking a good long while, I'm unsure exactly how long, when I would hear rustling in the trees at regular intervals. Now, looking back, I'm sure I caught sight of something shimmering in the bushes, but at the time, I thought it was just the daylight poking through the leaves. Before I realised it was beginning to go dark, and I had spent the whole day hiking around and enjoying the sights. The impending night and the still occurring rustling was making me uneasy. I decided to head back to my car. I knew I could be back to the car in at least half the time I had been hiking, because I had constantly been stopping and starting to spy the local wildlife and had, generally, been taking the whole hike easy. I was about halfway back and was walking with pace when I glimpsed something that appeared to be gold and red. I continued walking, my mind not as fast as my footfalls, but when I realised how out of place those colours were, I stopped in my tracks and turned back. There, sat on a bare branch about 20 feet away from me, was a curious-looking owl-like creature, easily 5 foot tall. Now, I am by no means an avid birdwatcher, and as previously stated, I'm not from Arkansas, so don't know all the fauna, but I must admit that I do have a decent knowledge of animals and plants, and this odd-looking thing was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was well aware of my presence and stood on the branch, watching me, its wings twitching with every step I took, its gold glimmering in what was left of the daylight. I was about 7 or 8 feet away from it, trying to get closer, not sure what I would do if I ever did manage to get to it, when it suddenly took off from the branch and flew right above my head and over the trees on the other side of the trail. Before I could even fathom this, 4 small golden chicks flew out from deeper within the wood, following what I assumed to be the mother. I was completely taken aback, but could only attempt to pursue them so far without leaving the trail. And I wasn't going to leave the trail, as stated previously, I don't know the area that well. Obviously, I have attempted to find or identify this mysterious bird, but all attempts so far have been unsuccessful. As stupid as it sounds, the best way I could probably describe it to you guys is if the Pokemon Ho-Oh was an owl. I never felt threatened by this creature. In fact, I feel like with it protecting its young, I was probably threatening it more. And it was probably more scared of me than I was of this bird. If anyone in Arkansas, or anywhere else for that matter, believes they have seen this bird, or if you think you know what it is, I would love to know. I had just graduated from college in 2016, and as a celebration, my dad took us from our home in LA to Redwood National Park, way up at the northern tip of California. It was summer and we were up for a week of hiking, camping, fishing and hunting. The drive there took us just under 12 hours, and on the first day, it was dark when we arrived and we were happy to just set up the tent and get some rest. At our camping spot, we were alone, and I also want to point out that me and my father are avid and seasoned campers, and have been practicing survival, hunting, fishing, etc. for as long as I can remember, and he had done the same with his father. Not to mention that we had both been up here in this exact area multiple times before throughout the years. With that said, let me give you a rundown of the strange experiences that plagued our trip that week. It originally started on night 1, though we didn't really have an idea at the time. It was about 2 or 3 AM and I woke up to the sounds of some horrifying gritty growls, long, low and rumbling through the forest. I was about to wake my dad, but he had already begun to stir himself. The sounds continued for a while. They sounded like they were coming from a big bastard and sounded as though they were quite far away, on the other side of a small patch of coast redwood trees which were located next to our tent. Me and my dad glanced at each other in confusion. A few long, quiet minutes of contemplation passed, only the repetition of those blood-curdling howls. My dad finally turned to me and said, uncertainly, that it must be bears. I wasn't fucking stupid. I'd never heard a bear sound like that, but unwilling to go out and look for myself and desperate for sleep, I took his reasoning as gospel and tried to get back to sleep. I still remember hearing that call until I finally fell to sleep. The next morning, we were up at the crack of dawn, as was normal on our trips. We began packing the tent up and planned on spending the day fishing at a small body of water that was surrounded by trees on either side, making it secluded pretty much every time we visited. Despite being summer, there was a light drizzle, but it wasn't so bad that we felt like we couldn't do anything. This lake was about a 2-hour hike away from our previous spot and we were there before dinner time. What we saw when we got there still shocks me to this day. Most of the trees closest to the water's edge had had their branches snapped and tossed on the floor, some of them too thick or heavy for a normal man to snap, and the bark was peeled off the tree trunks, leaving the wood underneath bare. Some strips of bark were draped over other branches, and it must have been fresh as the bare wood still had the rich colours that only freshly exposed wood had. However, this wasn't the worst part. My dad shouted me over and I went to his side. On some large boulders that are partly submerged by water and partly on the banks were 3 barely distinguishable battered fish. And by battered, I mean they had clearly been clubbed off the rocks as innards were dispersed like a firework over the rock's surface. My dad couldn't dismiss this as bears and admitted how strange and disturbing this all was. He checked the perimeter of the area and, after finding nothing else amiss, asked if I still wanted to fish and camp here. I said, yeah, why not? And we erected our tent before spending a good, uneventful 6 hours fishing for dinner. We lit a small campfire, cooked some fish, ate some fish, had a talk about the future and what I wanted to do, put the fire out, and turned in for another night's rest. Unfortunately, this night would turn out to be more eventful than the last. I again woke deep into the night to hear grunts, in the same sort of tone as the growls the night before, but from right outside our tent. Before I could gasp, which I was going to, my dad covered my mouth and put his finger to my lips. It was silent other than these really heavy footsteps, often followed by this primal grunt. I was visibly shaking and I could tell my dad was pretty terrified but was trying to play it cool. All of a sudden, the sound of our pans and plates being thrown across the ground, followed by a loud grunt, made me weep out loud. Suddenly, it all went quiet, and then these heavy footsteps raced over as if they were going to plough through our tent. The footsteps stopped abruptly right outside our tent and was followed by heavy, nasally breaths. From in the distance, we again heard the growls from the previous night, and this creature, whatever it was, began panting and grunting loudly and wildly before racing off into the trees, the sound of breaking branches emanating. My dad told me not to open the tent and to try and get some sleep, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. I somehow managed to fall asleep, and the next day we found absolutely massive footprints in the soft, wet sand outside our tent. We didn't fuck about and basically threw the tent into its bag and shot off from the area, collecting our pots and pans and leaving behind the massive footprints that I could take 2 paces in. For the next 3 nights, we heard or saw little, other than the odd growl at night, which we adjusted to as it wasn't really doing us any harm, and when hiking to our next spot, we would occasionally see broken branches, but nothing else. However, that all changed on the 6th night. It was our penultimate night at the park and we had enjoyed ourselves immensely. Where we had decided to pitch our tent this time was nothing spectacular, just a small clearing in the woods. I had awoke close to dawn, though it was still dark, to answer nature's call. I unzipped the tent and walked over to the nearest tree when I heard rustling in the trees a bit further back. Mid-pee, I peered my head from around the tree trunk and was met with soft yellow eyes. They were sharp really, but not bright, and they were at least 3 feet above my eye level. At first, I thought it was something in a tree, or on a tree branch, but then my appearance must have startled it, and it moved back, rushing deeper into the woods. I stood, dick in hand, at what I identified as a huge bipedal creature, thick, matted, greasy hair, brown in colour, covering most of its body, and primal, Neolithic features on its face. It was, by all accounts, a Bigfoot. I stood in the dark for at least 5 minutes out of fear, maybe out of sheer shock. I climbed back into my tent and didn't tell my dad the next day for fear he wouldn't believe me, and since we hadn't seen much or heard much since night 2, I didn't want to ruin the end of our trip. I didn't need to tell him though. He saw all he needed to see on our last day. Basically, the whole trail we had taken this week was one big circle, and we would complete this in the 7 days and end up back at our car for the last night and sleep in the back of it. So it's the daytime, and on our way back we take the rocky terrain which sees us climbing some small peaks. Traditionally, when we had been here before, we had used the extra elevation to do sightseeing on the last day, and this year was no different. It basically took us back the way we came on a difficult 12 to 13 hour hike, and we would go non-stop except for food and drink breaks to make it back for sleep. We would always get back at about 7 or 8 PM, and it's a real test of endurance. So, we had been walking all day, and it was about 6 PM. We had just passed that small body of water that we had fished in earlier in the trip, and directly adjacent to us was another small peak or hill. The hill wasn't too far away that you couldn't see the foot trail on the other side with your naked eye. In fact, you could see it clearly, and that's when we saw it. My dad spotted it first. At first, I just thought they were other hikers. My dad shouted me and told me to look. They were clearly bigger and taller than normal people. 3 of them, huge, hairy, bipedal beasts, slowly ascending the slope. My dad stood there, mouth wide open, eyes like dinner plates. They looked like how you'd imagine hunter-gatherers would look back in the Stone Ages. Hunched shoulders, hairy features, walking in a loose arrow formation. Me and my dad stood rooted to the spot, just watching these hairy humans looming tall, even from that distance, until they vanished into the tree line. We weren't scared, but me and my dad rushed back to our car faster than we usually would have. The next day, on the 12-hour trip home, we barely spoke about it. Once we did get home, we said nothing to my mother but had lengthy conversations about it with each other once I'd confessed to what I'd seen that night when I had to pee. Me and my dad had never been big believers in Bigfoot, but after these events, whenever we go hiking or camping, we are always aware of what might be lurking somewhere in the trees. I used to live in the middle of nowhere in South New Jersey when I was growing up, and being a kid with not too many friends and not much to do, I spent most of my time in the Pine Barrens, aimlessly wandering around, building tree houses and forts, and just having a good time. My fun was cut short by an experience that made me grow up faster than I anticipated and made me stop going into the pines as a kid. I was 13 when this happened, and as usual, since being a really young kid, I went off alone. I never went on any trails or paths and always explored as deep into the wilderness as I could. It probably was as dangerous as it sounds, but I was a kid who didn't care, and to be honest, my parents didn't seem to care much either. This particular day, I was on my travels, talking to myself and playing an army game by myself. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a pretty cold day, not freezing but chilly, and I was jumping about and kicking around leaves that were on the forest floor. I caught sight of it out of the corner of my eye at first. It was stood watching me in the distance. I looked over to see what appeared to be a peculiar looking goat, its face stretched and contorted. It didn't scare me. I thought it may have been attacked in a fight or something. I just stood, staring at it staring back at me. I was so tempted to go over to the goat. Despite the somewhat placid nature, I had always been told not to get too close to any wild animals and to respect their space. I refrained and kept looking. It didn't budge, almost as if it wasn't real, as if it was a statue. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable at the glaring goat, and I decided I'd just get back to my own thing. The goat seemed to freak and snarled at me before unveiling 2 leathery, bat-like wings. I screamed and fell backwards, and this creature, which I now knew wasn't a goat, bounded out of some shrubbery and came barreling towards me on 2 hooved legs. I scrambled to my feet and began running, this thing hot on my heels, its steamy breath on my neck. I was crying out in fear as I ran, the boost of pure adrenaline pumping me higher than I'd ever been. It was either run or be killed. I slashed my face on a sharp branch hanging from a tree. The blood streaked across my face and fell to the ground. This seemed to excite the goat thing, and I was beginning to cry now too. I didn't know where to go. Would it follow me home? I kept running and saw the light of the field that separated me from my house. I burst out from the trees and continued running. I couldn't hear the goat now, but I kept running just in case. I didn't stop, not until I got home and was safe in my room. I looked out of my window and there was no sign of it. it didn't follow me out from the trees. Afterwards, I didn't go into the woods much. I'd obviously heard the legend of the Jersey Devil. I mean, I grew up in it. I grew up in the same area, but no part of me ever thought it could be real. I thought it was just a silly story used to scare kids. If what I saw that day wasn't the Jersey Devil, I'm sure as hell I'm sure that damned creature had something to do with the origins of the story, because what I saw, it matched the descriptions to a T. Two springs ago, I had set up some trail cams on my land to try and get an idea of the populations for the upcoming hunting season. They live streamed back to my PC, back at my house, and one morning I woke up and got about my daily routine, which included checking the cameras to make sure they were all in fully working order. I would review the footage itself later in the day. So I'm looking and I notice that where one of my cameras should be showing, there's a grey box and a small blue box saying no signal. This hasn't happened before, and I assumed it had just lost signal. I checked through the recorded footage on my PC and it appeared to show something behind the camera, fiddling with it until it falls from the tree. It's on the floor but facing down, so all you can see is a black screen, and then it cuts off. I drive out in my buggy. Where I had this camera placed was about 1 mile from my property, and it takes me no more than 5 minutes to get to the spot. The strange thing is that I can't find the camera anywhere, and I mean anywhere. I find bits of the black strap all torn up, but there is no sign of the camera at all. Obviously, I'm pretty pissed that my $200 trail cam has been destroyed by some freaky animal, and I decide that I would come back that night to try and stake out the animal that did it. I didn't plan on killing it, just observing it and identifying it. It's late and I headed out alone. I have no reason to take someone with me as I'm staying on my property, and I set up a small camouflage tent a few yards away from where the trail cam was, and I wait with my night vision binoculars. Nothing could prepare me for what I saw. It was as if it just suddenly came into being. 2 bright dots next to the tree the trail cam used to be on. I was deathly silent as I looked through the scope, trying to ID it, but I couldn't. How could you ID this? I don't know what colour it was due to the night vision, but I couldn't make it out at all in the dark, so it was black or dark grey. It looked like a massive shaggy dog or unkempt wolf, except all 4 of its legs were facing the wrong way, its knees bending inwards like a horse. I had to slowly cover my mouth as this mutated beast emerged from the bushes nearby. It was easily 5 feet tall and 8 feet long, no exaggeration, and it was bony. Its ribs were fully visible, as in the skin had torn away, revealing the actual bone in a hole on one side of its chest. Same with the bottom of its legs and patches on its back. Bare bone could be seen. It had a large head, like a Tasmanian tiger, and sported huge, razor-like teeth which, along with its chin, appeared to be soaked in a liquid, probably blood. It didn't look healthy, but it seemed to be fine with the condition of its body. It walked over to the tree and sniffed it, and then it did something I'll never forget. It turned and looked right into my eyes through the binoculars. I did that stupid thing they do in movies where they flap a little bit and knocked over the tripod the binoculars were on and rolled onto my back. And I dared not move. I lay there for at least 15 minutes before moving, after I was sure I could hear nothing. I got up and looked through the binoculars cautiously, expecting to see those blood-drenched teeth centimetres from my face. I saw nothing. It was clear the dog had gone. Now, before I end this tale, a few weeks back, I woke up early in the morning. Being winter, it was dark outside and I went to the kitchen to brew the kettle. I like tea, what can I say? I'm about to go and check the trail cams, as I always do, but just before I do, I pull up the blinds. Out in the open field, just outside my porch, I see this huge, distorted dog prowling the field. It must have seen me pull up the blinds and instantly turned its head to look at me. Sharpened yellow eyes with focused black pupils assessed my entire quaking body. It suddenly turns and runs off into the woods in the distance. I follow it with my eyes from the kitchen. I'm not stupid, I wouldn't follow that outside. I noticed its exposed bones, really dark grey fur, and awkwardly bending knees. Now, I've set up trail cams in the same area since, but I've never caught anything like it since. I've looked into it and can't really find anything matching the description of this dog-like creature, and my son recommended I share it here in case anyone else has seen it. Hey guys, Brothers Jackson here. Like I say, full of a cold. Still hope you enjoyed the video, still hope you enjoyed the narration. I've been waiting to bring this one out for a long time. I've only got one other video that's still not quite finished, but it's quite a long video that I had waiting to be uploaded for as long as this one, if that makes sense. Yeah, I've been waiting to upload this one for ages. I've had the stories for ages, and I've just not really got round to finishing it. I mean, I did record it at one point with the wrong mic. I am rambling. I hope you enjoyed this video. The first story as well, I had to include it. I know it's not particularly a scary story, but I thought it was dead interesting about, like, the golden red bird. I mean, well, owl-like thing. I mean, it's crazy. If I saw something like that, I would be blown away. So I thought I'd include that one, and I thought I'd include it at the start, because I realised it wasn't as scary, and I thought, if you listen into like two scary stories and then you heard that and then the other scary story, it might break up the flow a bit, but I just thought it was worth the narration. The second story, the Bigfoot one, for a Bigfoot story, that was pretty good, because I am not huge on Bigfoot stories, if I am honest, and that was a pretty good story, so I was happy to have found that. However, my favourite one... No, do you know what? My favourite one this episode was that Bigfoot one. That was a pretty good account, and they had multiple things happen. However, I did like the last one with, like... I mean, I don't know. Is it like a crawler? I don't know. He doesn't know either. Leave it in the comments what you think any of the unidentified creatures are from the first story, the bird. If you've got any ideas what you think it is, comment that. And from the last one, comment as well. Hopefully I've got a few collaborations coming out in the next few weeks. Hopefully I've got that big UFO extraterrestrial video, which has been waiting to come out for literally months, but I've been recording it in parts. But I've also been, I also think I'm going to send a couple of the stories over to some other narrators, get them to narrate a couple, so that'd be pretty cool. And yeah, there's going to be more paranormal stuff, because obviously I really like doing the paranormal stories. I'm going to try and get a few more of the strangers, let's not meet sort of stuff, you know, like stalkers, dodgy characters and stuff like that. Anyway guys, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and that is about it. I hope you all enjoyed it and have a good week. Thank you very much. Peace out.